Welcome everybody out, and glad to have you here to worship with us, and welcome new faces. I know some over here that I haven't been able to meet yet, but and others that I have. I'm glad you're here to worship with us. I pray that it would be a good day of fellowship together. And, you know, this year, if you've been with us or if you haven't, we're going through, taking the year of 2025 to walk through as a flyover of the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, often known as the Pentateuch, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And we're kind of coming at the close here. We have 1 week left after this in the book of Leviticus. So if you are new with us, yes, you get to jump right in to the thick of things and the depth of Leviticus. And I hope, though, that it'll be a blessing to you. But let me ask you, as if you remember now 7 weeks ago, anybody remember how did the book of Leviticus begin? What was the issue that was at hand at the beginning of the book? Anybody remember? Moses could not enter into the tabernacle, right? He was outside of the tent of meeting while Yahweh was inside, after having 7 times been in the very presence. And why was it? Why was it that Moses was outside? It's because God had set up his residence among the people, and he'd filled it with his presence, right? But quickly, what had the people done? They had prostituted themselves to false gods, right? Breaking the very covenant they had just taken with Yahweh. And the book of Leviticus is basically, it provides this step-by-step process on helping the people to understand how the God that they serve, the one who is infinitely gracious, by the way, with them, offers a way back into fellowship with him. This is what the offering system was all about. Helping the people move from impurity to purity, right? So that they might participate in tabernacle worship. And the people were called to be what? A holy people, set apart from all the nations around them. Why? So that by their set apartness, in a sense, they might reflect the very character of Yahweh whom they worship. How they eat, their sex lives, their treatment of creation, their treatment of others, all reflect a God who is set apart from all other gods. And it's through the offering system that Yahweh offers the people a way to draw near once again when they don't properly reflect the image of God that they bear, right? And so why have all these Torah instructions that we've been looking at, why are they all necessary? Why? So the people could experience the fullness of Yahweh's presence among them. Now, I know you and I, none of us are fooled by thinking any part of life is perfect, right? Nothing ever goes quite to the way they are planned. But if the people of Israel begin to live out the regulations put before them in this book, in all the rest of the Torah, it says that what? That Yahweh's presence would mean blessing for them. If they are not going to follow them, Yahweh's presence would mean what? Death, cursing, right? But if they were to follow them, if they were to do all these things, right? If they were to live them out, what would their day-to-day life look like? If they lived in obedience to his statutes and regulations, as we saw in Leviticus 18. What if they bore the name of Yahweh properly, as we saw in chapters 19 and 20 last week? Are there certain things that they would focus upon to help them live in harmony with both one another and with Yahweh? Well, that's what chapters 23 and 25 we're going to go through today help us to see. Giving a glimpse into the daily lives of the people as a whole. And it's these routines, all these routines in these 2 chapters relate to one word, one theme. A word that we as a church are very familiar with. But if I may speak boldly, I think it's a word, I believe, that we as a church, not just talking about just grace here, but largely as a church, often get wrong. And I think it comes down to the theme of the Sabbath. You know, so often when we speak about Sabbath, what do we mean? What do we typically mean the Sabbath to be about, right? We mean it as a day when we take off from all work to what? Focus on finding rest for ourselves, right? I need to find a way to Sabbath. I need to rest from something. And we tell each other that maybe we need to take a Sabbath so that we don't burn out, or maybe we need to take a Sabbath just to relax, to get away, right? And we even say that we call this the day that we gather together like this, we call it a Sabbath. Many times we even claim it to be a law that we have to follow, though, right? Even though, interestingly, out of all the 10 commandments, you know what the only commandment that's never mentioned as a command in the New Testament is? To follow the Sabbath. Did you know that? Even though it's not a command, it's found nowhere in the New Testament, we sometimes follow it and say we must do this. But what if I told you that our view of the Sabbath as a day of rest for ourselves was actually a false belief? What if I told you that the reality of the Sabbath found in the Old Testament was never meant for me to break away so I can merely cease from working and kick back? What if I told you that the Sabbath actually has everything to do with taking time away from work to give myself away so that others might benefit from my time of freedom? Would you want to fight me for that belief? Would you say, well, it's a good thing that it is the Sabbath, or I might have to do the work of showing him what for, right? Some of you are thinking that, right? Well, I say this, put your boxing gloves down for a minute, and I would say, come along with me in these chapters. And I believe what we're going to look at today, I want to show you a more beautiful picture of what the Sabbath is than the minuscule view we often take of it as merely setting aside a day for me to rest. I think that is such a small view of what the Sabbath is. And there's a better view. So what I'm going to do, I want you to trust me in walking through this, and I think you'll see the beauty by the end of what the Sabbath truly can be. But before we start this dive into the Sabbath, I want to kind of look at the verses right before it in chapter 22, kind of where last week's left off to give us a context running into it. Look at chapter 22, verses 31 through 33, the very end of chapter 22. It says, you must be sure to do my commandments. This, I am Yahweh. You must not profane or make common, in other words, my holy name, and I will be sanctified in the midst of the Israelites. I am Yahweh who sanctifies you, the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Yahweh. So as we read these chapters, these 2 chapters here, we are to remember why they matter. Why do these chapters matter? Why? They're done so that the Israelites would obey and keep Yahweh's name from becoming common. And they are to do these things because Yahweh has rescued them out of slavery to be their God, okay? This is why all of these Sabbath commands matter. So let's look at the very first 2 verses of chapter 23. It's kind of a lead-in to all of these things that matter. And it says, Yahweh spoke to Moses, speak to the Israelites and tell them, these are Yahweh's appointed times, which you must proclaim as holy assemblies, my appointed times. So I want to kind of define a couple of words in here before we proceed. Each of these Sabbath-related items are twofold. A Sabbath is twofold, what it's for. First, they are called appointed times or moed. And if you want, there's in your notes, if the little handheld notes, there's more information on these. And it says that they're also to be holy assemblies or mikra kodesh. So first I want to highlight the appointed times, the moed. This is not the first time that this word shows up in Scripture. The very first usage is all the way back in creation. Jump back to Genesis chapter 1 with me. Genesis chapter 1, on day 4, after God has separated the light from the dark, he's done the waters from above and below, he's made the land. This is what he says in day 4. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be as signs to indicate seasons or me'od, and days and years. First time that this word is used. Yahweh in creation, he sets up the sun, the moon, and the stars to be indicators to the people of the moed or appointed times. That's why he puts them there. He says, I put them there so you know the times, the moed, that I've appointed. They're signs to let the people know when they are to celebrate these moed. They're your calendar to know when to draw near. And why do I say draw near? Well, you know what the tabernacle is called in Hebrew? The tabernacle, the place where God's presence is called an ohel moed. A what? Tent of meeting. The place where the times are appointed that you would draw near to meet with God. And it's these appointed times set up by the heavenly lights are to be when you are to meet with Yahweh. Why? Well, we'll see in a minute. But the second thing is, he says, is they are to be a holy assembly. All of these appointed times, all of which are going to be Sabbaths, are set apart gatherings of the people. And the word mikra there, it comes from a word meaning to call out or to summon, to bring people together, to summon together. You know, when Nehemiah, when they built the wall and they brought the people out, and Nehemiah brought out the law to read to everybody, they what? Gathered together, and it was he says they read the instructions or the moed. It was a time to gather together to hear the law. It says you get everybody together, and it's a holy, set-apart assembly. And you know, the reality is we get together all the time, right? We gather together for many things. We go gather for a hike. We might gather together to watch a game or play cards or whatever it may be. However, this is an assembly set apart for the presence and loyalty to Yahweh. And what do you do for these holy assemblies? What they would do, they gather in each other's houses, right? You'd eat a Sabbath meal together. You light Sabbath candles. You remember what Yahweh has done for you. This is what each of these following 7 Sabbaths are all about in this chapter. There's going to be 7 Sabbaths that he's going to go into. They're all about remembering what Yahweh has done. Each one is going to say either this is done to Yahweh or before the face of Yahweh, in front of him. God's people gather together on these Sabbaths, these holy assemblies, to give Yahweh what belongs to him. And he has appointed them even in the stars above. You with me? So why are all these here? To tell the people when they should gather in order to give Yahweh what belongs to him. So let's look at some of these together. There's going to be 7 of these in chapter 23. We're not going to read through these. I might hit a couple places. But starting in verse 3 all the way to the end, there's going to be 7 different Sabbaths that are mentioned here. And they're going to be up here if you want to take a picture. And the first one that's mentioned in verse 3 is just the weekly Sabbath. For it had been their Friday night to their Saturday night. All right? It's mentioned because it occurs regularly. All other observances will be based on this fundamental 7-day calendar structure. Everything else will go based off of this one. It doesn't give many details. But remember, it was in creation, the very thing was first called holy. Anybody remember what the very first thing called holy was? It was the Sabbath. The very first thing in Scripture called holy is the Sabbath. It's set apart. But what remains after this one weekly Sabbath, and I'm not going to get into all the details of these, are 6 annual Moedim. And the first 3 happen within the first 6 months of the year, and the other 3 are going to happen in the latter half of the year, all in the 7th month. So there's 3 in the beginning and 3 in the end of the year. So we have the weekly Sabbath. So the first one of these that are, rest of these are festivals that the people are going to gather together to do. The first of these is Passover is named. And it starts off the very first month. This is how their year would start off, is with the Passover. Right? We study this in depth. But it begins the year because why? It's the very foundation for this relationship, right? Yahweh rescued the people out of slavery on this day. And the people are going to take a whole week to celebrate. And remember it by eating a meal that reminds them of the night the death angel passed over the homes with the applied blood of the lamb. And you think about it, that's a pretty good way to start the year off, right? It's better than our New Year's celebrations with a ball dropping, but it's a reminder that God had rescued them from their slavery. So start your year off this way. And the next 2 are linked together. The third is the third one of these up here is the first fruits. It was the festival where you give back to Yahweh the very first, the best of your early harvest. The Passover is always celebrated in the spring, usually March or April. This is why we follow Easter, follows the Passover. That's why it shifts every year, because it changes. On the first day after the Sabbath, following the unleavened bread that you do, the week of unleavened bread, you offer your first fruits. You don't get to eat your first fruits of your harvest. Instead, you bring it to the tent and you give it to Yahweh. You say, my best, my first, all belongs to you. So I've celebrated that you've rescued me out, and now the best that I have goes to you. And then, after that, 7 times 7 days, which would be, what, 7 times 7? 49 days, right? After the first fruits, you have a Sabbath, and then the next day, you have what's called Shavuot, or we call it, 50 would be Pentecost. You have another feast called the Shavuot. And this is like the midsummer. It's 7 weeks after the first fruits, which occurred a week or two after Passover. And so we're kind of in June during the summer harvest. And so what we're to do here now is we're to take some of the end of our harvest, and we're to do what? Bring it to God along with some animals and offer them up to Him. You see a pattern starting to kind of develop here? So those are the first 3. I know I'm giving you a lot of information. Go back and read. They're the annual Moedim. The next 3 all occur in 1 month. Guess which month? The 7th month, right? Notice that 7s are present in everything. Well, the first day of the 7th month, doesn't matter what day of the week it is, the first day of the 7th month, to set this apart, you blow trumpets, right? It's a day, it's an extra Sabbath. That's a full rest. You get an extra day of Sabbath. And then on the 10th day, the Day of Atonement. We've looked at that, right? Every year. And then on the 15th to the 21st day of the 7th month is the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. It's a 7-day moed. Again, you don't work on the first day, and you don't work until the 8th day. Think about this. There's a lot of things going on here, right? We're lucky if we get like 2 weeks of vacation. These guys are getting vacations every week right now. I'm just kidding. But each of these festivals, all of this detail, there's a lot going on here. They tell a story, right? Each of these tell a story to the Israelites. You have the story of liberation from slavery. What would that be? The Passover. You have the story of God blessing them with abundance and produce, so you give back to God what He's given to you. First fruits. Pentecost. And then you mark the beginning of the 7th month, this special culminating month, with a horn blast. And then on the 10th day of the 7th month is the day that God liberates us and saves us from all of our sins and impurities. All the death that we introduce into the world, intentionally and unintentionally, are all taken care of. That's a day to celebrate, right? And then it all culminates in a 7-day retelling of the journey through the wilderness. Right? These people, they didn't have like houses that they moved along with them. They were sitting in what? They're in tents. They're in makeshift tents out in the desert. So matching the liberation story, Passover, with the 7-day feast is now how God liberates us from death in the wilderness, carried us through on our way to the very promised land. And so what you have for a whole week is you move, when they get into the land, they move out of their nice houses and they go live in tents for a week. Why? They celebrate a moed by living in a tent. And at the center of the camp is whose tent? Yahweh's tent. Everyone's creating their little mini Edens in the land to remember what God has done. Now, some of you are like, okay, that was already too much information. Some of you are going to be upset that I'm not going to give any more information on those. I'm not going to cover all these in the sermon today. That's as much as I'm going to give on those. I'm moving forward. There's so much I have to leave out. And I'm going to send something out this week, okay? I'm going to send something out this week. I think one of the beautiful things of this that I'm not even going to hit today is taking a look at how Jesus Himself fulfills all 7 of those. Amazing to see how He does that. Look for the email that's going to be going out this week. If you aren't on the email list, fill out that connection card. We'll get it to you, right? If you really want it. Now, I want to show that in an email. But what I want to see from these festivals is they're not merely rules to follow so God gets what He wants from His people. They are appointed times for the people to gather together, to rest from their labors, not so they can separate from the assembly to relax, but so they can be entirely focused on what Yahweh has done for them. To remember what he's done and to celebrate together in worship. So the first thing I want us to understand about what a Sabbath is and understanding the beauty behind it is that the Sabbath first and foremost exists to give God what he deserves. Our praise and our very best. First, for him. Always to Yahweh. Why are all these festivals? To give God the proper praise. But we're not done with the Sabbaths yet. Let's look at the Sabbaths of release. Jump over to chapter 25. And I'm going to spend even less details on these, okay? We're not done with the Sabbaths. Chapter 23 is all about the weekly, there's too many sevens in my mind. The weekly Sabbaths that go on in these days that happen. But these in chapter 25, there's going to be two things that happen here, and they're both going to be Sabbaths of entire years. An entire year of Sabbath, okay? There's going to be two of those. And there's two Sabbaths they speak of are the Sabbath year, the year of rest, and the Sabbath of Sabbaths. So a Sabbath, and really the Sabbath means, it comes to mean 7, right? So the 7 of sevens, which would be 49 years, every one these happen. So every 7 years these are going to happen, and every 49 years. So again, brief in this explanation. I am going to send out I did these more in depth a few years back. If you want more in depth on any of the festivals or any of these, I'm going to send links to the old videos. You can watch them. That's not to toot my horn, but it helps you to see these with more information. I'll put that in there as well. But I want to look at the first Sabbath year first. Look with me in chapter 25, verses 1 through 4. Yahweh spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land I'm giving you, the land must observe a Sabbath to Yahweh. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather produce. But in the 7th year the land must have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath to Yahweh. And you must not sow your field or prune your vineyard." Couple of things I want to point out. First, this is whenever the people are going to enter the land that he's giving them, right? The land is a gift to the Israelites, so they should treat it accordingly. They didn't earn it. They didn't gain it. God says, I'm giving this to you. It is not theirs to do whatever they want with it. It's God to decide what to do with it. And second, notice what is to observe a Sabbath to Yahweh. What is? The land is to observe a Sabbath. Sabbath, that's kind of weird, right? But Sabbaths are for the land as well. And if you think about it, it's an agrarian society, right? The people are working the land to produce the fruit. But every 7th year, what you have to do is you are supposed to let the land get the Sabbath it needs, and you're to trust Yahweh for the provision the land will produce without being worked. I have a nice fig tree out back. I love, the great thing is I don't have to work for it. That thing is wonderful. It just produces figs. I don't cultivate it. I water it, I guess, if it's getting too dry. But God says, let it be and take what is off of it without cultivating. In a sense, every 7th year is to be a return to Eden before the curse. And if you think of these Sabbath years are for whom? Who are these Sabbath years for? Yet again, it's for the land, but also they are done to Yahweh, right? He's the provider, and we're to give the best of what we have. In this case, our entire livelihood, actually. To him. You are to Shabbat the land. The festivals demonstrate the Sabbath is for Yahweh, and now we see that Sabbaths are to provide for the land itself. I let it rest. Why? Because the land, what? Needs Sabbath. You ever think about that? It's like your cubicle needs a time away from you. Get away a little bit. But lastly, I want to examine the greatest Sabbath. what we call the Jubilee. All right, look at verses 8 through 12 in chapter 25. You must count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, and the days of the 7 weeks of years will amount to 49 years. You must sound loud horn blasts in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, on the Day of Atonement. You must sound the horn in your entire land, so you must consecrate in the 50th year. So you take the Sabbath year in year 49, and then you do another 50th year. That's 2 in a row, by the way, that you can't cultivate. You talk about trusting. Whew, man. You must proclaim a release in the land for all its inhabitants. And that year will be your jubilee. Each one of you must return to his property, and each of you must return to his clan. That 50th year will be your jubilee, and you must not sow the land, harvest its aftergrowth, pick the grapes of its unpruned vines, because that year is a jubilee. It will be holy to you. You may eat its produce from the field. A lot going on there. A couple of things. This is done every 49 years, 7-7. So it's like a double perfection in a sense. And on the 50th year, you take a completely holy year. For what purpose? Verse 10 says what? What's the purpose of this 50th year? To proclaim a release in the land, what? For its inhabitants. We've seen now 3 things that Sabbath is for. First, it's for Yahweh. Second, Sabbath is for the land. Third, it's for others. Others in the land. I rest from my work to give to Yahweh, to give to the land, and to give to others. And what are all these releases going to entail? They all have to do with releasing your neighbor from their burdens. If they're under the burden of having lost their land, you who purchased it are to return it to them so they can own it once again. But what if I bought it in year 48? If they're under the burden of it being an indentured servitude, they lost everything and they're working for you. You are to release them and their family from that burden. What if they gave me 8 years and I'm in year 1? Why? Why do I release others from their servitude, their slavery? Because they were slaves in Egypt. That's what Yahweh has done for each one of you. If they're impoverished, you are to release them from the burden of crushing debt. Why? Because without Yahweh's provision, you be in the exact same position. The year of Jubilee, the Sabbath of all Sabbaths, has to do with one thing. You're taking rest from your labors. Why? So that you can release others from their burden and bring them rest. I want each of us to take note of something. In each of the instances of the Sabbath, the weekly festivals, the 7th year, the 50th year, what do they all have in common? They always are times that I am to take time of rest, not to provide something for myself, but to give to others. Nowhere in the Sabbath laws are they called to take time for themselves. Did you know that? And I'm not only to do that, but I do it within community. And I never do any of these things alone. I give to Yahweh what belongs to him, and I celebrate it communally. I give to the land and rest it needs. And then I provide from what I have so that others are released from their burdens. The Sabbath was made for rest, but fascinatingly, it's not for my rest, but was given so that I might help provide rest for the burdens others carry. But here's the inevitable question. Well, if I'm to provide for all the other people on my time off, how do I find rest, right? What do you think? Allowing other people to provide it for me. We men struggle with this, don't we? Anybody? Some women. It's definitely a man thing. We hate to get help. We hate to find rest. But here's the reality. This would be great if it all worked this way, right? But I don't trust that if I give all of these offerings, which, by the way, are on top of the 10%, if I go through all of these festivals and do everything, this is not my 10%. This is on top. This is about, if I do all these, it's about 24 to 26% of what I own. We get mad whenever we have like 8% sales tax on things, or the government wants something, right? I don't trust that if I give all of this, there'll be enough left over. I don't trust that if I give the land the rest it needs, I'll make it through that year, do I? My 401k is going to be depleted. And probably here, most honestly, I don't trust that you will provide for my rest. I think you're going to look out for number one. So what do I do in each of these situations? I look out for number one, and I go after grasping for what rest I think I need. And I use this day that is set apart for a purpose, and I use it for myself. Kind of like Adam and Eve, who had all the trees in the garden, the tree of life, and what was it? They didn't believe that that was enough. So what did they do? That they needed that extra tree to grasp it for themselves, because that would be truly enough, right? I don't trust that God will provide. And you know what? We know the Israelites, they ultimately did just this. Isaiah 1, go read Isaiah 1. God talks about their festivals and their new moon Sabbaths, all their things. And he says, God goes, in the Hebrew goes, I can't even bear up underneath them. God says, when you bring all this garbage to me, it's a burden I can't even bear. The end of 2 Chronicles suggests that the reason they were kicked out of the land, you know why? Because it says you'll be out 490, they were in the land for 490 years, and they're going to be kicked out for 70 years. Interesting. Anybody math majors there? 490 divided by 70 is 7. What happens every 7 years? A Sabbath rest. You know what the Jews never did, according to Chronicles? Not one time did they ever do chapter 25. Not one time in their whole history. They never trusted. They were given it, and they never one time did it. And God says, I'm going to get back those 70 years that you never gave. That's why they're out for 70 years. And by the time Jesus comes along, they twisted the Sabbath in this restrictive law that instead of removing burdens and giving life, it robbed others of the joy of the holy day, right? How many times did Jesus get knocked for doing something on the Sabbath? Look real quick at Luke chapter 3. I love this passage. 13, not 3. 13, verses 10 through 17. I'm going to read through these. I wanted you to see what Jesus does here. Jesus understands something about the Sabbath that the leaders didn't. It says, now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. Hey, that's good. They're gathering together, right? In the synagogue, togetherness. And a woman was there who had been disabled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten herself up completely. Talk about a burden. 18 years. And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said, woman, you are freed. Released is the word there, from your infirmity. And then he placed his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up. And what does she do? She praises God. Where? In the assembly. But the president of the synagogue, indignant or angry because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the crowd, there are 6 days in which work should be done. So come and be healed on those days and not on the Sabbath day. And then the Lord. I love that it puts the Lord in there. It doesn't say Jesus. It's like reminds you who's in control here. The Lord answered him, you hypocrites. Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from its stall and lead it to water? What are you doing for it by the way? You're working by leading it. And what are you doing on that day? Getting it to water? You are providing. You're releasing it from something, right? Then shouldn't this woman, and the Greek here is even more appropriate, is like, isn't it, or is it not necessary? Is it not necessary that this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan bound for 18 long years, be released from this imprisonment on the Sabbath day. The leader of the synagogue says, what? All the 6 other days are the most appropriate day to bring healing and burden. Jesus says what? The most appropriate day is actually the Sabbath. If you knew what it was for, you would use this day to release them. This is the most appropriate time. Jesus reminds them that the Sabbath is necessary day to do the work of releasing others from the burdens they carry. And then together, after that, what do? They worship God. So what about today, okay? Why are you telling all this? Let me share a few things. Let me first share what I'm not saying, because this is inevitable too. What I'm not saying is that no one should ever take a vacation or ever do anything to rest. Please do. Go on vacation. You're a lot happier when you do, all right? I know it. Enjoy your time away. Enjoy your family and friends during times when you don't have to work. Please do. I'm not speaking about vacation days, but rather about a time set apart for a specific purpose. And what are those set apart times? I think they're twofold. First, we are to prioritize giving to Jesus what is due to him. And it's interesting, as believers under the new covenant, we've already talked about this, we are not bound by the laws of the old covenant. They're gone. The Sabbath is not a command for followers of Jesus. You don't believe me? Go read Hebrews chapter 3 and 4. It spells it out for you. Study it this week. Why? Because Jesus is our rest. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus gives rest. He says, take my yoke upon you, and you will find rest for your souls. If we have faith in Christ, we find the ultimate rest the Sabbath was meant to be. But recall this, that Torah is still instruction, right? We may not live under that code, but there's truth for us to learn from. We're not required to celebrate festivals, anybody? On weekly Sabbaths, but we are to set aside a time in which we gather together as the people of God to give to Jesus what belongs to him, which is our sacrifice of praise. That's why we're here right now. This set apart time for that reason. And we do so how? Communally. Holy. Not at home through a live stream or a recording, if we have a choice. Not a division of our church family into separate meetings. This time is sacred. We are the temple of the living God. And I think this is even, a side note, I think this is even why I think when we think about multiple services, I'm not getting on to other churches, I'm talking for us. I think we are seeing that as a fractured thing, that we're splitting our congregation. Just call it 2 churches and move on. Because we're not gathering together in a holiness. We're getting separately something for our own sake, if you ask me. That's Christopher's opinion. We gather together, why? To take communion regularly, as we're about to do. To remember what he's done. And we can gather for a meal, like we're about to do shortly, to eat and celebrate. I think this time together takes precedence. We set it apart. Why? Because we have been set apart. This should take the priority of your Sunday morning. Nothing else should come in priority of this time, nor mine. Again, don't hear what I'm not saying. If you're on vacation, go be on vacation. Enjoy, okay? That's not what I'm saying. But secondly, perhaps we can view our time off from work not merely as days to rest, but as an opportunity to provide rest for others within our church family. And here's the reality. I need sleep, right? I need downtime. Sleep is my daily reminder that I'm what? I'm not God. Anybody? Right? But I can get sleep and still never find rest. Anybody ever felt that? You get plenty of sleep and never rest. Jesus spoke about rest for our souls, and I think this reality that we can learn from the Torah of the Sabbath. My hope in what I do on this day, and it's interesting, nobody ever has a problem with the pastor working on Sabbath, right? My hope in what I do on this day and the other 6 is that my ministry to each of you releases burdens from your weary soul. You know, I got a text recently. I share this. I'm not going to say who it is, but this meant a lot to me. This is what their text said. I just wanted you to say how much I'm being blessed and just set free by going through Leviticus again. When do you ever think you'd hear those words? I didn't realize how much wrong theology stems from ideas and the set rules that are in this book. Oh, I love that. The preaching of the word set them free. And I pray that my teaching, my counseling, my service will free others from their burdens. But here's the thing. Y'all also provide me with the rest that I need. You know how? It's like Andy Teston coming over to my house when I couldn't figure out why the light, the ceiling fan wasn't working. I put it all together, it wasn't working. And he comes over and takes it apart and realizes, oh no, that whoever rigged it up there, I'm lucky our house didn't burn down. I'm not kidding you. Now, even though 2 of the wall outlets don't work right now because of that, he came over and that ceiling fan's working great. And then later, he helped me install something into my hot attic the other day when it's crazy hot out and we're sweating. It's whenever whenever our van breaks down on the way, 1 hour into our trip, 17-hour trip breaks down, and I limp back and Mark Venata not only buys the part, but he comes over and fixes the fuel injector in my van. You think that brought me rest? But not only that, in that same trip, Jay Stutzman, who lets me borrow his vehicle because we don't have one and we have to improvise to go on another trip, he lets me have a vehicle so we can take our family to get away, to release a burden. Mark helps me with my gas card. Jay helps me with my electric one. It's Deborah Yates, who I get a text from her frequently. It says, I'm praying for you right now. It's when the church bought us a new air conditioner last year. You talk about burden bearing, burden lifting, and doing those things, and they're on times that people were off. I hear stories of Javen's life group coming together to help him put up a fence to clear his land. He was showing it off recently to me. He's like, you see that over there? That's what my life group came over and they helped me to do that. And I know they gathered later to help support the Neufelds and what they were doing. And previous to that, a couple months ago, many of the same people went over to the Lang's house to help them build a roof, right? Or Susan Marola, who is the airport taxi for everybody in the church, pretty much. I'm not saying don't call her for that, but that's our running joke. It's those that come into work parties and work here and give their time in the church to help things. It's Scott and Wes going to coffee with Gus Marola and helping him to get connected and be a part of something in the community. It's providing meals for those who are in need when they're sick or they've had surgery or whatever. It's Phil and Jeff helping to bury a member's dog this week when they couldn't dig the hole themselves. What do these things provide? They provide rest. I can get sleep. I can go lay my head on my pillow and get sleep. But I need you to help provide me with the rest that I need. And they happen during people's time off. And if we're living as Christ has called us in this community, what goes around comes around in such a beautiful way, does it not? We provide rest for others here, trusting that they will in turn provide for my rest when I need it. Because the way of Jesus is never about taking. It's always about giving and laying aside my privileges so that others may be released from their burdens. I believe this is the beauty of the Sabbath. May we live fully into this reality for God's glory and for our benefit. Amen. Well, we're here in a moment. We're going to take our communion. We're going to sing. We're going to take a communion. We're going to gather together in the eating of a meal. And I encourage you, please stick around. If you're new, you're welcome. There's plenty of food. There always is. But stick around, get to know each other, share what God's been doing, give a sacrifice of praise, share what he's doing, getting to know, not just talking about only the common things, but about the holy things, how to pray for one another. I think that's an important thing that we get to do as a family. It's a beautiful picture of what Christ has done for us. So as we gather here in a moment, we're going to do that, and we'll do it, why? Together. That's why we always take the cup and the bread together as a community.